This is Don Clark of Invisible Creature. You're listening to the Master of One podcast. You can find me at invisiblecreature.com or iCreature on the socials.
Welcome to this Sandbox episode of the Master of One podcast, part 2 for this week. This week we talked to concept artist and attraction designer for Universal Studios, illustrator Tim Anderson. I'm Andrew, your Master of Art and Design.
I'm Patrick, Master of Television and Film.
And I'm Luke, your Master of Toys and Games.
So get your fast passes ready, because you don't need to wait in line for this episode.
No, those aren't a thing there.
So for this week's Sandbox episode, we're excited to talk to somebody who we've talked about on the show just recently and is also a member of our Slack community. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome concept and attraction designer for Universal Studios, illustrator and designer Tim Anderson to the show.
Okay.
Thanks for having me.
Tim, so before we go even to your Wikipedia page, which is where we always like to start, I want to just do a couple of things. One, say your hair is looking high and tight, my friend. Like,
well, thank
super,
you.
like, well done. It is on point. But before we connected with you, or while we were connecting with you on Slack, on Skype, your profile picture pops up. And your profile picture looks a little less together than, let's just say it that way. Yeah, a little less manicured. Maybe just talk us through, describe for all of the people out there listening what your Skype profile picture looks like, because it's
I have
quite
to
an
even
introduction.
remember. Is it the guy with the gun and the cat?
Yeah.
It is.
Okay.
It is.
So I often communicate with my brothers. I've got a bunch of brothers, and we're kind of scattered across the country. So we'll get together to play games or something, and we usually use Skype. And I think that was just some random image I found, and I threw it up there to see if they'd notice. And then over time, they have each found a profile picture of a person holding an animal and a gun, which are a lot. We each have a different one, but there's kind of that theme we have. And I had it taken down because for a while I was interviewing for jobs via Skype, and I thought that's probably not what I want to lead with. I've since put it back up, apparently. I've forgotten.
Make an impression. I think
yeah.
that's great.
Not sure that's the kind of impression going for in a job interview.
That's a good story, though, if they ask about it.
That's true.
All news is good news.
If I'm being honest, I totally want to use that photo as the episode artwork, but I won't. But that is totally, there's a desire in the back of my head that, hey, with special guest Tim Anderson, and it's just this photo
crazy
of
old man with a gun and a cat.
Yeah, that's
I don't know why it exists, but yeah.
And it's not even just like a gun. It's like a machine gun, isn't it? It's like an Uzi or something.
It's a long gun.
It's a fully automatic something. So,
yeah.
All right. So now that we've gotten that out of the way, and everyone that we're out of time. These are our final questions.
Right.
Tell us who you are. Give us a Wikipedia page about yourself for anybody out there who's not quite sure of who you are yet.
All right, yeah. So you mentioned I'm an attraction designer, concept designer, illustrator. I've got a bunch of different titles depending on what I do, but I work for Universal Studios in Orlando, Florida. This Friday will actually be my 3rd anniversary there. So I've been here a few years. I grew up in the suburbs of Philadelphia and always enjoyed art. I wound up getting an English degree before I realized concept art was a thing. I got one of the Art of Star Wars books. I was so that's a career I can make out of art. So I applied to the Art Center College of Design in Pasadena, California, studied there for a few years, got another degree in illustration, and I graduated in 2009, and I've been working in films, games, theme parks since then.
So we're going to try our best to cover as many of those topics over the next 45 minutes as possible, with the understanding out the gate that we're probably going to have you come back on to talk about some of those things. So I'm just going to get that out of the way now because it's just inevitable, right, Patrick?
Oh, absolutely. Inedible.
Okay, so it's edible. So I want to just jump into the whole idea of concept art. and you said you realized that concept art was a thing, like you became aware of it, almost like enlightened to it. Talk to us about that process and about what specifically about that was attractive to you.
So, I was like drawing. I think most kids do. Often we kind of get to an age where we outgrow it, or the skills don't keep up with your vision for what you'd like to do. And I kind of pushed through that, but I didn't know what to do with it. I took art classes all through high school. I took Photoshop classes, and I knew I really enjoyed that, and I really enjoyed movies. So actually, when I first started college, I was a film major, and then I realized kind of the behind the camera thing wasn't what I was into so much, and I wound up jumping around from one major to another. I was in psychology, a whole bunch of different things that were fascinating, but not really what I wanted to do. I wound up getting a bachelor's in English, but I still wanted to draw. And then, I've always been a huge Star Wars fan, so I kind of grew up around all that artwork. And my dad had one of the old Joe Johnston sketchbooks that I kind of remember thinking like, oh, that's drawing. But growing up in a suburb of Philadelphia, it's not really that connected to the entertainment industry. So there were just certain facets and careers within entertainment that I wasn't aware of. And so it was Star Wars, just seeing like, oh, these people get to draw pictures of Star Wars and kind of decide what that stuff's going to look like and how that connects with the audience. That was really the connection to film that I didn't know existed. Bridging between it. And even the term illustration sounds more specific than just artist. Nobody makes quote unquote makes a living as an artist, but illustrator was like, oh, that's a job title.
Profession.
That's something. Yeah, exactly. And so it was kind of still a little bit of a risky move, but by the time I graduated with my English degree and I moved on to art, I was married and my wife was supportive of making that jump. So went for it, and I'm so glad I did, because I don't know what to do with an English degree otherwise.
So you and 99% of the people who have it.
Right.
But that 1% gets along great.
They figure it out,
So I'm curious, already you've rattled off so many different things you've been involved with. Do you think that your passion has changed over time, or do you think that all these experiences have been like honing in on one thing?
I used to think that was the ultimate goal, is to kind of hone in on, what is that one thing that I really like to do. The more I've done, the more I've enjoyed certain aspects of it, but no one thing has kind of scratched that entire itch. But there's so many, and a lot of people would find that to be dissatisfying, feeling like, oh man, I'm never going to make it. I'm never going to get there. And I don't know when, but I kind of hit the point where I realized like I enjoy that aspect to it. I enjoy that variety, and I enjoy that yearning to kind of keep going. And I don't do it with any specific goal in mind to say like, I'm going to find that one career that really is everything I want it to be. But I kind of pull little pieces from it here and there, and part of it, it's the journey, not the destination, I guess.
Sure.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of pressure, it seems, to do only one thing. And not only that, there's a lot of pressure to do that one thing differently than everyone else around you. So what has that been like? Like, take your art, for example. What has it been like to, is that how you approach it? Or have you just had to say, hey, I'm going to do what feels good, and if it looks like someone else or doesn't look like someone else, it doesn't really matter in the end?
Kind of the latter. I'll look at artists that I admire and try to study their techniques and try to, honestly steal a little bit of what they're doing without completely copying the style. I love simplicity of certain designers, like, Tom Whalen. It's deceptively simple. It looks like it's simple, but there's so much going on there. And then you've got artists like Kevin Tong, where there's a lot of texture and a lot to it. So there are elements of those I like, and maybe those two don't go together in a 50-50 mix, but I take 10% from this guy, 10% from that guy. And, there's this desire for illustrators to kind of develop a style. And I admire those. There are some artists out there where you're like, oh, that's like Tom Whalen, for example. Like, that's a Tom Whalen. Like, he found his style, and that's awesome. And I don't know that people have told me like, oh, that looks like your style when they see one of my things, and I don't see it, because I'm just doing kind of what I am into at the moment. And so maybe there's something that threads them all together, but I don't know. So I'm just kind of figuring out, when I sit down to work on a piece, I just figure, what am I shooting for? Do I want it to look like an old comic book cover? Do I want it to look like this or that? And then I just kind of fake my way through it.
So I want to circle back to something at the very beginning, and then we'll kind of move our way back through to your artistic side of like creating prints and posters and things like that.
Sure.
Because there's a ton of breadth in both of these areas. I'm interested though in the attraction design stuff.
Okay.
So growing up, you were always drawing and you were always creating things. But what is the translation and then the transition into designing something that is not just something that's going to live in a 3D space, but I do air quotes to say a drawing that you're doing, that someone can hold in their hands, into something that is 4-dimensional in the sense that it's totally experiential and it's 3D and it's an environment. What's the translation that has to happen there, and then the transition that you have to do as an artist?
So I think one thing that I've always liked about illustration, I kind of realized the illustrations that I really get into and admire are ones that you can kind of let your mind wander through. And I'm going to try not to spin off on too much of a tangent, but that's one of the things I really liked about Star Wars in general. The classic trilogy. There are all these. There's that corner of the cantina. There's things that we don't see, but you kind of let your mind wander through. Sure. And so as I was learning to draw, I was really drawn more to the kind of environmental design. I'm not a great character designer. I enjoy doing some small props and stuff, but the thing that I really enjoyed through school, you kind of get that breadth of different types of design, was environmental design, just because you can kind of get lost in that. And so theme parks are, you can physically walk around in these spaces, let your mind wander through them, but also, with the end goal of having people actually walk through them.
So when you're doing that, though, what specific skills do you need to actually bring into that? I'm guessing you have to do turnarounds and things like that. But what's the freedom you have in that? And then what are the restrictions that you see creating for something that's going to be a real world experience?
Right. So probably the two biggest restrictions, and sorry, the restrictions, because that's basically the beginnings of your parameters, are gravity, and then probably even stronger than gravity and physics is budget. And those are the two things that limit things more than anything else. So it depends on the project. They'll say, usually we'll start. I'm on the concept development team, so I come into a project 5 years before anybody can even say anything about it. And at that point, they say, it's blue sky. They say, do whatever looks cool. And then a week later, they're saying, we can't afford any of that. Reel it in. So
start
really,
from
that's exactly. So a lot of it's that. A lot of it is, it would be great to see giant. We have a Jurassic Park area in Islands of Adventure. It'd be great to see giant dinosaurs walking around. Nobody disagrees on that.
Yeah.
And then you show it, and then finance is like, well, we can't afford to clone dinosaurs. What else you got? It kind of goes. So the same goes for the spaces. It's kind of exactly. It's usually
we've got
call
$18 and some a couple of interns.
They call it value engineering. That's the term. Yeah. So it's just like So it's good to have boundaries when otherwise it does get kind of crazy. You bump up against those boundaries a lot, I guess. But I hope that wasn't too rambling answer your question.
No, that's good. That's good. So, like you said, you've been there. You're coming up on 3 years. So, can you give us an idea of some of the stuff you have worked on in the park?
Yeah. So I have to be careful to think about what's already been announced. Right. So I do a lot of storyboarding. I haven't before. That's kind of one of the tasks I have here, just because in the concept development stage and the blue sky stuff, one of my roles is working on the team that puts together the pitch package to show to the executives who are going to give the thumbs up or not.
Yep.
So to get it greenlit, and then they'll take that package and they'll hand it off to a project team, and then they take it to fruition. So I'll see something, and then I'll put my fingerprints on it, and then they'll spend 2 or 3 years wiping my fingerprints away until it's just a vague smudge.
Value engineering.
Exactly. Well, and then there are other designers who get involved, and once they're on the ground, it's like there are other factors to consider. But so I storyboarded some of the early versions of the Jimmy Fallon attraction that just opened a couple months ago.
Nice.
I did some early concepts for the Super Nintendo Land stuff that's been announced for Japan.
Yeah.
I think that's probably all I can say about that.
That's cool.
And potentially maybe Florida at some point. I'm saying that, you're not saying that, and you're not confirming or denying. I can say whatever I want. Like, I'm the president of...
There's no hand motions. There's nothing.
Yeah, I'm the president of the United States. I can say that because no one's going to fact check me. And I have I have not signed any NDAs.
Exactly.
So you kind of threw this in there, and correct me if I'm wrong. So this process from when your team gets it to when something actually comes out is like 2 to 3 to 4 years?
Yeah, depending on the scale. Yeah, which is very different because I mentioned I'd worked in video games before, which can have a turnaround of 6 months to a year, depending on, you know, if you're working on expansion packs or stuff like that. So this is a lot less reactionary. You have to consider that what you're working on now still has to be relevant 3 or 5 years from now.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So, all right. So you mentioned video games. So talk a little bit about was it all concept there too? Or what'd you do for video games?
Yeah, so right before coming to Orlando, I was working in Salt Lake for Electronic Arts.
Okay.
And I was working on The Sims.
Nice.
Which has a huge following.
Yeah.
I am not part of the demographic.
Sure.
So, but it was a great studio to work for. It was great. You know, the longer I work in entertainment, the more I realize how important the work-life balance is. Yeah. And that was great at that studio. I'm trying to think of positive things to say. It was great to work there.
Yeah.
As a concept artist, it was not the most challenging.
Well, yeah, that's what I was gonna ask, because that is such a known world, and kind of once you get to a point, it's kind of all you can do. They've reached that almost probably 10 years ago almost. So how did that work for you as a concept? Like, where do you go? How do you push yourself creatively to keep coming up with more Sims stuff?
Yeah, well, that's a great question, because that's kind of what led to the other stuff I do. So during we were tasked with, in this expansion pack's going to have a dining room set. Design it. Now, it has to fit within this box because the whole world is built around, this standard size for a dining room table. Right. It has 4 legs. It is this high. So basically, I was coming up with different shades of brown. It was kind of like, so I would get these tasks, and it wasn't really that creatively fulfilling. It paid well. I could go home. I was 9 to 5, 5 days a week, no overtime. So I wasn't going to leave that behind. Yeah. But it did kind of leave me creatively unfulfilled, which is when I started doing my poster work on the side, where I felt like, if I can do something that comes from me and I don't need approval from producers or an art director, I need to prove to myself that I'm still a productive artist and that I can design. So that's how it started. I designed a couple posters to put on my cubicle wall, and then people were like, oh, that's kind of cool. You should think about selling those. Yeah. And I was like, oh, I guess I'll. So I set up it was a blog spot, and I just had a PayPal button, and it did well enough that it sustained itself, and I was able to grow it from there. But if I had been as creatively engaged there as I am now, I probably never would have started doing the stuff on the side, which is where I probably get the most personal fulfillment artistically.
Absolutely. It's funny listening to these time frames where you have the video game world that could be as little as 6 months, contrasted with the 2, 3, 4 years for Universal. And then now you have these smaller these poster projects, which I imagine maybe I spend an evening, or I spend 3 or 4 evenings, or whatever it is. Now, has the driving factor behind that just always been the complete freedom?
Yeah. I mean, there have been a couple projects that I've been commissioned to do by groups on Facebook, like that Who Framed Roger Rabbit one that Andrew had talked about the other day. Yeah. That was a group said, we like your kind of pulp cover noir style. How would you like doing that for Roger Rabbit? And so that idea came externally, but and I would show sketches to the group, and they would give suggestions and stuff. I still ultimately kind of had freedom over that. So that's probably, as far as my side projects go, that's about as close as I get to having somebody tell me how to do it, which is kind of nice.
Yeah. So you made this funny statement before we got started. You made the comment, and I might correct me if this is slightly off, but that you don't really feel like you know what you're doing.
Yeah.
But you use that as like a kind of fuel when you're creating, or you use that to drive the process. So what does that look like for you?
Oh man, I do the print work, and I've kind of taught myself how to do the actual printing for some stuff. And I have a small shop in my garage because I didn't know how to do it. And I've done a handful of, I think I've done maybe 8 or 10 of my own prints, and I still mess it up horribly. But if I keep that mentality of it's okay that I'm learning, that I kind of struggle through this, it makes it better. And I'm trying to get into toy design. I'm trying to do just little things here and there because I feel like I don't want to find that one thing. I don't think it's out there. That one thing that will encompass all of my skills. And so if I feel like I'm aiming to quote unquote know what I'm doing, then I'm only going to fail and see it as a falling short of this potential that probably doesn't actually exist. So I feel like keeping that mentality of not knowing what I'm doing keeps me free to make mistakes and to kind of try things that I wouldn't try if I was trying to look like I know what I'm doing, if that makes sense.
And it does, and I think that's great. There's a couple people right now that are coming to mind, people that are in the community that have struggled with that question of, do I have to pick one thing, or is it okay if I just do a bunch of different things? And I think it is so important to see someone, again, you've been, I would say successful with your work given your, minimum looking at a resume, right? You're getting to work with these big properties and big organizations, and you're getting to work across all these different mediums. And I think it's great to get permission from someone. I think it's great that you're saying that because someone's going to be listening right now and they're going to say, you know what? It is cool that I dabble in 10 things. It is okay that my Instagram isn't all only illustration or all only print design. So I love what you're saying right now, and I think what you're saying is very important to a good portion of our community.
Oh, well, yeah. Thanks.
It makes me think about how a lot of like Patrick said, a lot of people say you got to kind of find that one thing and you've got to be good at that one thing. And that is absolutely a true statement for a lot of people. But then there is also another group of people. And I think I was recently watching a video in the last couple days about something entirely different. But the message was that essentially that anybody who proselytizes that there is only one tried and true way to do something is probably trying to sell you something. Right?
Yeah.
And the idea that there's a one-size-fits-all kind of situation. So as your work has evolved and as you've taken on different projects and these different things, what has the evolution been intentional? Have you, because you've dabbled in these different things, I say dabbled as if working at Universal Studios as an attraction designer is dabbling.
I'm testing it out.
I might catch on.
Yeah. You know what I mean. Because you've been involved in all these different things. Has the evolution been intentional, or have you found that it's come more either haphazardly or just organically?
Probably more organically. It's as opportunities arise, and so I always enjoyed working the entertainment design. Graduating from Art Center, they kind of prepare you to work in entertainment design, and so that could be films, games, theme parks. It kind of varies, and so I've always been open to whatever I can use to put food on the table. So that's that was kind of the professional driving force. And as I've gotten into each one, there are things I like about them and things that I don't. So to say that I went into art school so that I could become an attraction designer wouldn't be accurate, but I love doing it now that I'm here. Now, if you were to ask, do I see myself doing this 20 years from now? I don't. I'm okay with it. I don't know. I think the time of, and this is maybe a generational thing, but a time of starting at a company and working there until you retire just isn't feasible. The longest I've held down a job since I graduated was 3.5 years, and that's just because of how quickly the industry changes.
Yeah,
so the fact that I'm here for 3 years is starting to make me a little nervous. Hopefully there's more longevity here because I do like the job, but I don't think years from now when my biography is written, or one of many biographies I'm sure will be written about me.
Yep.
But I often wonder, like what will that title be? And I don't think attraction, it won't be like Tim Anderson, the life of an attraction designer. It'll just, and I don't see myself. I see myself as an illustrator / designer, and I'm currently fully employed as an attraction designer. I'm taking those skills, and this is the box that I'm putting them into.
Yeah.
During the 9 to 5, and then I have other things that I do here. So I feel like maybe separating myself from that as my identity is a way to protect myself against feeling like I've failed if I get laid off again, because that just happens in the industry.
Sure.
So maybe I'm just tricking myself into like, they can't touch you. You're not an attraction designer. You're an illustrator, and you're just,
even if they fire
they'd be doing you a favor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
So that touches on the second half of that idea, or that question, which is, what have each of these things that you've been involved in, all under the guise of artist or illustrator or designer, what are the different itches that those have scratched for you?
I think creating experiences, I don't know, I'm storytelling, I guess, honestly. They're just different ways of telling a story, and whether that be a narrative, beginning, middle, and end, or it's placemaking, as in themed entertainment. It's things that I always admire in, like, the Disney parks do it really well, where you can just find a little corner and there are just little props or little things there that tell you got a Frontierland at Disneyland, and there's like a pair of boots off in the corner that's, who knows why it's there, and you can kind of make up your own little story. Video games, you have opportunities to kind of tell little stories. I think it's just that opportunity that these different outlets of design can kind of engage people's imagination in ways that connects in a way that other forms of communication can't.
Sure.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that you said earlier, if I can make a connection, if I can be so bold as to put words into your mouth, you mentioned that one of the biggest things in entertainment design is the constraints that are put on you by the budget or by the by just whatever the parameters, and then you mentioned that same. That same, and you didn't say it was a downfall, you just said that this is a restriction. You said the same thing with developing for games, specifically with Sims. And then you said in that process is when you started designing these posters, because in my mind, the way that I read that is you needed something that would remove the restraints, that would scratch the itch of being able to create something for yourself, not necessarily you as the consumer, but create something without the limitations of the budget or without the limitations of the executive signing off.
Yeah, and it
so
sounds. Go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, it sounds like those are two. It makes a ton of sense to me. If there's this thing that it's not unlike people who do freelance, right? They've got the day job to pay the bills, and it might be wonderful. They might love doing it. But it also might not be the most fulfilling thing, and you used the word fulfillment earlier, or satisfied. Yeah. And so they do this other thing, which is a passion project. That's kind of right. And it's nice for you that your passion project is also something that you make money at doing.
Yeah. And then there's some days where. Yeah. Well, there are some times that my day job doesn't follow those passions, because I am that this company's paying me, so I need to do what they say whether I agree or not. Often that overlaps, and I'm glad you put it in the words you did, because I feel so pretentious trying to say like, oh, I have to do my art. There's kind of that I'm an artist and I have to express myself, because it sounds really pretentious to say it that way, and to some people who. I think everybody has some creativity within. Yeah. There are some people who don't, who it's not their driving force.
Sure.
Or at least they don't realize it is. They it may come out in different ways. And so, but to anyone for whom that is the driving force, you think like, I just need to make something that comes from me. And if somebody will pay me to do that during the day, and then I'm going to follow those opportunities. And when that's not the opportunity, I need to create my own.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we want to touch on one more topic before we get to our finals, and that's we talked about the Roger Rabbit print, and that was how I first really kind of got introduced to your work, and it was during the preparation phase of us talking to the folks out at Mama Sauce.
So Nick Sembrato.
Nick Sembrato. And so in the research phase of that, before we had them on, I saw, we were on their website looking at all their stuff, and I saw that and clicked, and he had a whole blog post about it. And then I got connected to you and just all that stuff. So talk to us about your relationship with Mama's Sauce, and because you've also mentioned that you did some of your own. At least you dabble in self printing, screen printing. So talk to us about that relationship.
Okay, so the only reason I've really started doing my own print, I guess there are two reasons I started doing my own printing. One is I do most of my stuff digitally, and that's both professionally and kind of stuff on the side, and it allows for freedoms that, traditional media don't. I can work upstairs. I've got 3 little kids. Oil painting's not an option. So I work mostly digitally, but I've kind of lost that the tactile connection of doing something with my hands. Sure. So one of the reasons I wanted to do my own printing was just to do that, so I could actually have my hands on the product that I produce. And part of it is also I started designing for screen printing, but didn't really understand how that process. You kind of have to understand how the production process goes in order to design appropriately for it. So it's those two reasons that made me do my own. But I don't have a huge setup. I'm not very good at it. And so there's certain designs that I need to outsource. So I've worked with a couple other print shops, and then since moving here, I discovered Mama Sauce, which is a 25-minute drive from my house. And I'm trying to remember now how I even first heard of it. I think a couple people mentioned them to me, and then Nick, I think it was a key speaker at Adobe had an event at Full Sail down here, and they had I don't even remember what the name of the event was, but they do it every year. And he got up and spoke, and I was at that time thinking, I need to find a local printer because I can't do a lot of this stuff on my own. Yeah. And he started talking about Mama Sauce, and I mean, he's great on your show. He's very gung-ho about He's got a great, engaging personality. Yeah. So he's up there talking about their shop, and I was like, that's what I'm looking for. Mm-hmm. So I emailed them and said, hey, can I come by the shop sometime? And I arranged to meet with with a couple people there. They walked me around. I was like, they're local, so that solves a lot of problems. Because I'm so new at designing for screen printing, I tend to kind of design myself into corners that are difficult to produce. And then with this shop being local, I don't have to email back and forth. I can physically go there and learn from them and figure out what I've screwed up so that I can fix it so they can print it. Sure. So it's kind of evolved with that. I think so far they've only printed 2 pieces for me. They did the Roger Rabbit, and they did one that I did for Kubo and the 2 strings. Yeah. And they nailed it. And I think one of my favorite things, not only was the product great, but working with them was great. It was they point out things like, this won't print well. Let's fix this before it's too late. So they have Anna is on their pre-press, and she walked me through a lot of stuff and helped me learn. And then the guys on the press, they got Tim, and they had Brandon. This other guy was there for a little while. I mean, just. And you've seen the actual print now for Roger Rabbit. I can only take credit for half of that because that was my design, but the printing job is amazing. They nailed the colors. It's great.
Nick said that you would only take maybe 10% at most, is what he said on the show.
Well,
that's what he said.
Yeah, exactly. He doesn't. I think he almost comes across as he wishes he was an artist or something. I don't know if that's the exact way to put it. But what he's doing, it really is a collaboration. I mean, he's definitely absolutely enhancing the work that you're putting out. So Nick would love to hear you say that.
Yeah, the print job on it is great. The ink. Yeah. So I have a handful of screen prints, but so I've seen good ones, and I've not seen a ton of bad ones, but I've seen what good screen printing looks like. The ink is laid down very, very nicely. It's evenly distributed, and the trapping is great. The registration is great. So I mean, if I were you, I'd be pretty happy with it. Plus, the illustration is dead on, and the noir style is perfect for that film. You don't see, and I was saying this on the show, you don't see a ton of Roger Rabbit stuff out there because the IP is so just jacked.
Yeah.
And so I was so happy to see that, and even more happy that you happen to have an extra one and were willing to sell it to me. All these different things, just the stars aligned for that print. So
I'm surprised. Good.
No, you finish.
I was gonna say I'm surprised at what a huge following that film has, because I grew up watching it. I loved it as a kid, but this group commissioned me to do it, and with the way those commissions work is they'll pay you up front, and so you've basically sold all your copies, and so right. To that point, it's just making sure they're happy with it. Whereas most projects I have to design and keep in mind, like, is anybody even going to buy this? Is anybody going to care?
Right.
So that had a built-in audience. I was like, sure, I'll go for this. And I had APs, and they went like that. I mean, it was a much stronger following than I had anticipated.
Well, it's a classic.
It's great.
You made the comment in there that with the printing, you wanted like something tactile, like something hands-on, because I imagine, staring at a screen all day, you don't, get the sense that you're a big, strong man working in the fields. Right. Do you ever think, like, are you ever driving down the road and you see like a lawn crew and you're like, I should just quit and cut grass for a living?
No, honestly, I mean, I mow my own lawn. I did it yesterday. I was like, that's one of the American things I did yesterday is I mowed my lawn. Yes, being the 4th of July for, when it's there.
He's still a man of the people.
That's right. But I hate it. I hate it because I know, especially in Florida, give it 4 more days and you're not going to be able to tell I did anything.
Oh,
so there's there's the futility of certain types of labor that I don't appreciate. It's putting that labor into a creative effort. So, like I said, I'm trying to get into toy design a little bit, making my own toys, or I do some woodworking. I built a lot of the equipment I use for screen printing or things like that. So
nice.
It's putting that manual labor into the creative process.
You don't necessarily want to be like sweating buckets while you're doing it.
I'm in Florida, so I don't have a choice. But yeah, that's not my goal. It's
state.
Just my gosh, it's crazy.
We'll go ahead and we'll transition into finals, so be aware of your time. Okay. And with all these different projects, the fact that in order to kind of take some type of like mental break from work, you ended up doing more work by taking on screen printing. You mentioned that you have, I think you said 3 kids.
Yeah.
What is your opinion of the 40-hour work week? How do you actually put boundaries or set how much time you're going to give to family versus freelance versus your job?
Yeah, that's tough. I mean, working in the film industry, there are 2 sides to that. You can say, 40 hours is way too much. And then working in the entertainment industry, like, if you can get it down to 40, that's great. Because especially in the games industry, there are a lot of studios that are not, they don't care about that kind of thing. So
sure. They're not 9 to 5s.
Right. Yeah. Well, they pay you as a 9 to 5. It's all salary, but a lot of them don't pay overtime and all that stuff. So, you're just kind of, you're expected to work as much as needs to be. And honestly, I think there are days where like I need to be at work from 9 to 5 because I have a lot of stuff to do. And then there's some days where like I could come in at 11, leave at 1 and have gotten just as much work done. So it's that arbitrary designation of 40 hours is some weeks it works, some it doesn't. But that's what they pay me for, so I'm there.
Yeah. And
as far as splitting up my time the rest of the time, it's hard. Because I, spend time with the kids. I mean, the reason I scheduled this call for so late is because I had to get my kids down to bed. I was getting them down to bed until about 10 minutes before we got on the call. And it doesn't leave me much time to work at night before I'm just exhausted because I've been getting up to run and exercise lately because that's something I let go for years. There's a lot to juggle. So I don't know if that's it's kind of turning into a therapy session. It's probably isn't what you meant for your final question. Good. But that's probably the biggest challenge. It's finding that energy and the time to kind of do it all. Yeah. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
I think we can kind of objectively stand back and say, well, in order to lead a healthy life, that we need to be able to say no to work at points, or we need to be able to say yes to family, and we need to be able to say, we talk about that, and then at the same time, we also need to get a paycheck because we need to have food on the table, and so it's just I think there's probably a lot of people listening that it's just a really hard thing to navigate because maybe they're relying solely on freelance. Maybe they're trying to quit their jobs so they can just only pursue the creative part or what they deem that. It's just so tough to have an answer because a lot of times what feels like the right thing to do flies in the face of like actually taking care of yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so my final question will actually be, I'm just going to relay a question from Mark Bowden. He's one of our patrons, and he says, his question is... Amgarsh, yeah.
Yes, we've chatted on Slack.
Yeah, our friend that just unfortunately has to live in Bermuda. It's just, it sucks to be him.
Your life's a vacation every day, Mark.
It's only exacerbated by the fact that he's only ever post pictures of him like looking at cruise ships and going to parades.
He FaceTimed me the other morning and was like, "Hey, there's pirate ships out here," and there were like 5 clipper ships, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, it's not real life. Nobody gets to do this." Okay, so his question, he says, you pick one licensed property that you're allowed to work on for the rest of your life, only one. What is it?
I mean, my knee-jerk reaction is Star Wars. I mean, that's
that's fair. That's a great one.
My holy grail, yeah. And I have done a little bit of licensed work. It's there are a lot of hoops to jump through with that kind of thing. So if you take that out of the equation, then yes, 100% Star Wars. Yeah.
Okay. So what I'm hearing is you don't want to do licensed stuff necessarily as much as just working and doing properties that you love.
Yeah, that's kind of a minefield because I'm kind of I don't want to tempt fate, but generally under the radar enough that you know nobody really notices. Give or take. I mean, I'm sure after this podcast, it's going to blow up.
This is going to be huge.
It's going to put me on the map.
Huge for your career.
I should probably get a lawyer as soon as we're done here.
Well, I would like to see you do maybe a cease and desist gallery where you pick like your top 10 properties, you produce work for each one until you get a cease and desist, and then you frame all of those.
Honestly, that's kind of how I've been running my personal career so far.
You've read his business model.
Yeah. And I've run into a couple. I haven't framed them, but
I would just love the life of an artist gallery, and all it is just framed cease and desist letters. That's your next project.
Or if you're Tom Whalen, it's just a bunch of letters from major studios that say, thanks for the great work.
Right.
We love you, Tom.
All right, so... I'll take my final question, and I'm interested to see where you take this because you mentioned that you consider yourself an artist and an illustrator and / designer. You put that / designer in there, and that every one of these jobs that you've had up to this point is just another expression of that in a different way of storytelling. Where do you see yourself taking the next step? Where do we see this? We'll just take that for what it is and just say where do you see that going next? What's the next expression for you? And maybe it's 5 years from now, or maybe it's 5 months from now, or maybe it's 50 years from now. But like, what's the next expression? Do you think?
Yeah, so I've got really loose plans, nothing solid. To create more of my own IP. I mean, it's a good follow up to the question that Luke just asked. That I love all of these franchises. I mean, Star Wars is, as I mentioned, is what got me into concept art. It's what sparked my interest in Art Center. That's being this love of these different IPs has kind of been what's fueled me all these years. But there's that desire to kind of do my own thing, and there's the hesitation because if I do my own thing, nobody's heard of it, and are they going to care? So it's getting to the point where. Maybe I'm a big enough name or an established enough, refined enough style that I'll be able to kind of get my own IP out there and have people care. Yeah. And that sounds really insecure, and it probably really is. Because the last thing I want is like, all right, here's my heart, here's my own IP, my own story idea, and then just have it greeted by crickets, which happens often enough, even with fan art kind of stuff.
Sure.
That it's kind of that's what's holding me back a little bit, but I don't know what that is yet, so that's why it's kind of loose. It's just kind of I don't want to just be, you guys had Mark Bricky on. He often don't just be a cover band. And so there's always that in his voice going through my mind, like don't just be a cover band. I guess ultimately creatively that would be my goal.
Man, so I think that resonates with probably more people who are listening to our show than you even know. Even the insecurity piece of that. I would love for you to just sit down with Noah Elias and talk to him, because he's doing all of that, the Disney fine art stuff, but then he also now has this kid, the Kid in Me, which is his own IP, and now that has crossed over into Disney, and Disney is hiring him to do Kid in Me styled and charactered things with their IP. So it's
that's cool.
He's a guy who's at least a handful of steps down the road from where it sounds like you want to ultimately be.
I find, if you follow what resonates with you, you're going to put the time into it, and it'll pay off. That example there, and even pieces that I've done that I thought, this will be really popular. Nobody cares, and I do one that I think is just for me, and that's what takes off. Sure. So I think it's if there's enough drive coming, if you've got enough fuel coming from within to give it that momentum, then that's cool to hear that. So it's encouraging.
Yeah. All right. So tell everybody where they can find your work. They can see all the stuff that we've been talking about, and maybe tell them what part of the park to walk and stand and just feel like you designed their entire environment around them.
All right. So my website is timothyanderndesign.com. I'm on social media as Tim Anderson Art. And, as far as what I worked on. So in a few years, if you ever go to Japan and go to Super Nintendo Land, then look around, and I did a little bit of some of that. Or, you go to any of the attractions opening in Orlando, Universal Studios, the next couple of years, I will have had a hand in that. I did design the construction wall that went around the King Kong project a couple years ago.
Nice.
I have a picture of that, actually.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and I have a couple of panels in my garage, a couple of the vinyl wrapped plywood. They were just throwing it out, and so I was like, "Can I have some of that?" Because I hid my kids' names in it. This is a tangent. I'm sorry to take that. No. But I wrote their names in it real small, so I have those in my garage now. Just gathering dust.
That's awesome. So, off air, I'm going to ask you way more questions about all that stuff. Yeah. But for now, we'll leave that where it is. Yeah, check out all of his stuff. Go follow him on social media. If you can snag one of his prints, do it. They're excellent. I can speak to it firsthand. The Roger Rabbit one, I just got back. My plane landed a few hours ago. Otherwise, the Roger Rabbit one would be framed and back here somewhere because I'm stoked.
You said you were going to answer the title, and I don't see it back there.
And I have the frame. It's right there. It's still laid out like flattening on my dining room table since I've been gone. But
I appreciate it. Thanks for getting that. Yeah.
No, man, it's awesome. So before we head out of here, would you help us by picking some tokens?
Oh yeah.
Rock and roll. All right, so that's it for the interview portion. Up next, we're going to draw some tokens. The tokens portion every week is when we figure out the categories that we're going to have the next week for our master category episode. And since Tim is here and he's such a nice fella, he's going to pick them for us. I've got the tokens in my hand. You see they're very real, very tangible. I'm going to shuffle them face down. I don't know what they are. No one knows what they are, but you're going to give us a number between 1 and 3, and this one's going to go for Patrick.
All right. Let's go 3.
TV 3? And film. Thanks.
It is TV and film. Hey! Congratulations. All right, and then you've got between 1 or 2, and you're going to pick for Luke.
Let's go 2.
2? That's art and design, Luke. Nice. You got that one. And I've got toys and games by default. Congratulations, you did it. Yeah. You can find Tim, all the stuff that we talked about in this episode, as well as a smattering of other things, over at mof1podcast.com. Show notes and links to all this stuff. You can head over to iTunes and Stitcher to subscribe to the podcast. That way we go to your device twice a week, every week. Tuesdays and Thursdays are our release schedules.
It's just there.
You don't. It just happens. You wake up and you're like, oh, I'm so here it is. And then you listen before you even take your morning pee. Yeah. We won't do your morning pee for you. You still have to handle that. But everything else just happens
Patrick will make
naturally.
you coffee, though. You just have to let him know.
He will make you coffee. Yeah. And so when you do that, it's super easy. But then, Patrick, what's the next step?
You need to rate and review us. That's right. Just tell us what you think about the show. Good, bad, indifferent. We don't care. We just want your attention. Whatever you say, we will read on air during our Tuesday episode. We have a really great one loaded in the barrel right now. And thanks.
And you can join the conversation on Slack. You've heard us talk about it several times in this episode. You can hit up Tim inside of our Slack channel, ask him whatever questions we neglected to ask him inside of there. So you can go to mof1podcast.com/Slack to join the community in there. It is a fun community. It's a helpful community. It's an encouraging community. And the people in there are just stupidly talented. I can't stress that enough. At this point, Patrick, Luke, and I have no business being in there.
Yeah,
because everybody else is just
podcast.
Yeah, it's a good thing that we have the keys to the house. Otherwise, no one would let us in. But it's an incredible community. You want to be a part of that. Find us on all the socials. Just search M of One Podcast. You'll find us. We just want to talk to you. We just want friends. That's really what it all boils down to. We want more friends, and that's why we do this. But for now, we're going to go ahead and get out of this episode. I'm Andrew.
I'm Patrick.
I'm Luke.
Oh, I'm Tim.
Peace out.
Bye.
Hold on to your butts.
Ouch. I think you meant your own.
Welcome to this Sandbox episode of the Master of One podcast. Part 2 for this week. This week we talked to concept artist and distraction.